Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Um, of course, tonight's learning is in the merit of all the Jewish people in the land of Israel on the front lines, those that are being held hostage. They should all be safe and secure. And if you would like to sponsor a class, you can let us know in the comments, send us a message. We would love for that. All right, let's get into it. So we're coming up Purim, just a couple weeks. Make sure to RSVP to Purim party, whether in Duluth or wherever you may be. Make sure you're at a Purim party. Make sure you're celebrating Purim and hearing the Megillah and doing all the mitzvahs. So we're going to delve a little bit into the story of Purim. The story of Purim starts in the year 3,392 after creation. I don't recall what that is exactly off the top of my head, what year that is in the Common Era, or the before Common Era, I guess it would be. And the story starts with Achashverosh start making a feast. Achashverosh makes this feast and he invites the Jewish people amongst them. And the Jewish people are in exile for 50 plus years at that point, and they were starting to forget about their Jewishness, about what makes a Jewish person special. And they're invited to this feast that the entire nation is invited to. And of course, we all know what happens. Achashverosh invites Vashti. There's a debate breaks out between Achashverosh and his ministers because he ruled over 127 countries, the entire known world at the time. And a debate breaks out amongst these different countrymen about which women are more beautiful. Let's see, he says, you got to bring Vashti here, and she's not going to be wearing any clothes. And I guess you could say it was not a place for a nice Jewish boy, bottom line. And many Jews went against the advice of Mordechai. And Mordechai tells them, it's not an appropriate place to be in this kind of, place. And they were even though they were given kosher food, according to most opinions in the Talmud, they were given kosher food because it says they were given whatever it says in the Megillah. They were able to get whatever they wanted. So they get kosher food and kosher wine. But they probably didn't necessarily, partake of that. They probably, violated the Torah at some point. But even not, they were starting to forget who they were. And comes on the scene Mordechai. Mordechai is the leader of the Jewish people. And what's very interesting is that the Megillah identifies Mordechai as a Yehudi, a Jew. It's the first time in history and Tanakh that somebody is identified as a Yehudi, a Jew, which literally means of Judah. And we'll see in a second. Let's talk about, before we get to what the term Yehudi means, we're going to talk about how Jewish people were referred to until then. There's the name of the Jewish people, at least ethnically, were always Ivri, the Hebrews. We know the Hebrew starts from the Torah tells us that Abraham was called a Ivri, a Hebrew. And so therefore, by saying that we're an Ivri, we are the Hebrews, we are descendants of Abraham. And this is this is a very important thing, that we are descendants of Abraham, and continuing his legacy of spreading godliness in the world. However, at a certain point in Jewish history, the word Ivri started to mean two things. There was the Ivri that became a political and ethnic name, and not just a name of the descendants of Abraham who proclaimed God throughout the world. And it became a political and a geopolitical force, that the Jewish people had their own land, and to the point where we see in the book of Jonah, Jonah it's actually the only place, I believe, in the Torah where the Jewish people are referred to as a Hebrew. After the giving of the Torah, the Jewish people are generally called the children of Israel. But the word Hebrew is used by Jonah. He's confronted on his journey by the captain of the ship, and he realized that the ship was capsizing, and they figured out that it was probably because of somebody who was doing something wrong against God, because this was a very clearly godly act, the way the ship was capsizing. So they find this man sleeping, who's the prophet Jonah, who's fleeing from God, and he says, they ask him, "Who are you?" And he says, "Ivri Anochi, I am a Hebrew." But he doesn't stop there, and he continues to say, "As Hashem Elokei Hashemayim ani yareh," that the Lord God of the heavens and the earth I fear. And the reason he says that is because he was trying to say, I'm not a political Jew, I'm not an ethnic Jew, I am a God-fearing Jew. This is the difference between me and the name Hebrew as an ethnicity and a geopolitical force. Now, what happens with Mordechai? Mordechai says that he's not identified as a Hebrew, but he's identified as this person that refuses to bow down to Haman. That is how Mordechai is introduced to us throughout in the beginning of the Megillah. So Haman is trying to understand what is so different about Mordechai, that he refuses to bow down, even though all the Jewish people were bowing down, and he refuses to do that. So Haman says that Haman says, I'm gonna get rid of him. I'm gonna get rid of this name this Yehudi, this Jew, and all the other Jews. So what is the name Yehudi? So the Talmud tells us in Masechtas Megillah, which is the tractate that discusses the laws of Purim and the laws of and some commentary on the Megillah, on the Book of Esther. So they says that we see that it says that Mordechai is called Ish Yehudi, a Jew from Judah. So maybe he's from Judah. So the Talmud says no, but then it says Ish Mini, that he's a descendant. He's a Benjaminite. He's from Benjamin. He's a descendant of King Saul. So which one is it? Is he a descendant of Judah, or is he a descendant of Benjamin? So the Talmud tells us that he was really a descendant of King Saul, as his lineage is discussed in the Megillah. However, he's called Yehudi because a Yehudi means somebody who denies idol worship. And this is what bothered Haman. This is what bothered Haman. That Haman says, why is this Jew different? What is so different about him that he is not giving in and bowing down to me, because he believes in God and he understands that God controls the world, and it's not up to geopolitical things. And Haman says, I'm friends with all these ethnic Jews, and I'm sure that he played cards with them, and they're involved in government. And then we have this other Jew, Mordechai, who says that he's not an Ivri, he's not a Hebrew, but he's a Yehudi, he's a Jew. And even though Mordechai also was involved in politics in some sense, even at that time, he sat at the king's gate, as it says in the Megillah. And nonetheless, he refuses to engage in political discourse. And, the law says that we have to bow down to Haman, but he refuses to do so. So Haman says, you know what? Let's look in the Megillah. Haman says that the Jewish people are Yeshno Am Echad. There is one nation, Mifuzar Mifarad. It is scattered and separate throughout the kingdom, and they don't listen to the Jewish. They don't listen to our laws. They have their own laws. Haman says to Achashverosh, they're lazy, that they always have the Sabbath once a week, they're not working. Then they have Passover. They always have an excuse why they're not working. And Haman says, listen, Haman says, anybody who's a Yehudi, who's a Jew, we're going to kill them. But Haman didn't stop there. He didn't just say, "Oh, well, anybody who's a Jew is but what about if somebody is just an Ivri?" They didn't distinguish in the end. In the end, every single Jew, man, woman, and child, was going to be killed on the 13th day of Adar by decree of Haman and the king. So Haman says that Haman's followers, but even Haman himself, he says, "Listen, I don't care if you're an Ivri or Yehudi. In the end, you're all the same to me." That's the end of Haman's decree. And the only out was that if you convert, if you say I'm not part of this, then you could be out. But we're told by our sages, and in fact, not one Jew breaks away. Not one Jew says, "Well, listen, I'm not so religious. I live in the outskirts of town. Nobody will notice." Not one Jew. The entire Jewish nation stays loyal, and even though they're being oppressed and they're given literally a death sentence, not one Jew says, "I'm not a Jew." Every single one says, not only I'm not an Ivri, but he says, "I'm a Jew." And if we go further, it's explained in Tanya, in the magnum opus of the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, this idea that when a Jew sins, he is really disconnecting himself from God. Now, it's not possible. At the same time, it also says it's not possible for a Jew to separate himself from God. So how is it possible that a Jew could sin? If a Jew can't really be disconnected from God, how could a Jew sin, which is against God's will? So he explains as follows, that the truth is that the part of the delusion of a sin is that the person thinks that by doing this sin, he's not really fully disconnecting himself from God, even though he truly is. If you're going against God's will, it doesn't matter in what way you're going against God's will, but in his mind, in the sinner's mind, he deludes himself to thinking that, he's not really separated from God. So he's able to have this kind of oxymoronic thinking that he could sin and still be connected to God. And therefore, a Jew, even though a Jew can never really disconnect himself from Judaism, and nevertheless, he's able to sin because he has this, so to speak, delusional thinking. And I'm using that word obviously broadly, but he has this kind of, this warped thinking that by sinning, he's not really fully disconnected. However, when it comes a time when there's a persecution of the Jewish people, even somebody who would sin on a normal basis, somebody who had sinned the day before, or somebody who is not well educated, or somebody who is not intellectually capable, even such a person is able to put that all aside and realize that when there's a time of persecution, they say either you're Jewish or you're not. If you give up your Judaism or you give up your life, they always give up their life. That's what it says in Tanya. And the reason is because at that moment, it's very clear to him that if he goes along with the agenda of the persecutors, he will be disconnecting himself from Judaism. And in that moment, he understands that. And that's what happened in the Purim story, is that every single Jew understood that if they give up, if they convert, or they renounce their Judaism, they all understood that they would be totally disconnected from God. And therefore, not one Jew in the entire kingdom, which was really the entire known world at the time, gave up their association with Judaism and even their association with Mordechai. They didn't even say, well, I'm not that Jew. I'm not the crazy Jew. I'm not the Mordechai Jew. They all stayed with Mordechai. That was one of the amazing things about Purim. And now the hard part is that now we realize that every Jew has this capability for self-sacrifice, and every Jew has this capability for connecting to God and cannot be disconnected from God. The hard part now is to bring that into practice in a daily basis, that your Torah and your mitzvahs and the fact that you're not committing a sin, to harness that inspiration from a difficult time. That's the hard part. And now you got to, use it to serve God on a daily basis. In other words, we said that the reason why a person might sin is because they think at that moment they're not disconnecting themselves from God, but they will not give up their Judaism. They're not going to renounce the religion because they cannot disconnect themselves from God. So the hard part now is to get that same Jew who is willing to give up their life to harness that same passion towards daily mitzvahs and against anything negative that possibly a person could do. Now, in the end, that is the victory of the Jewish people. And we look in the Megillah, it says in the end, La Yehudim haisa ayra v'simcha v'sasa v'ikar, which means the Jewish people, there was light, joy, jubilance, and honor. And what does that mean? So the Talmud tells us, ayra zu Torah, that the Jewish people what was their reward? Is that there was Torah. Simcha is a Yom Tov. Simcha refers to Yom Tov. Sasain, it refers to Mila. Apparently there had been some sort of ban on bris Mila, on circumcision in the times of Haman, and the Jewish people rededicated themselves to that. Vikar elu tefillin. It says that that vikar is tefillin, that the Jewish people were proud to be Jews and put on tefillin and in public, and even after this victory over Haman. So we see that this is actually what the Jewish people did in the time of Purim, that they took this inspiration of the being persecuted and the victory that came afterwards, and they didn't just leave it an inspiration, but they actually used it and applied it to their daily service of God and their Torah study and their dedication to the Jewish holidays and their dedication to education, starting with bris milah. Obviously, that's the beginning of a child's education, and of course, in their pride of being Jewish by putting on tefillin in public and being openly Jewish. Now, we all know what's going on in the world today with the Jewish people and the threats and the inspiration that is coming in some way. And the question is, how do we respond? What is the response of the Jewish people? So we have to look back. What is the response of Mordechai in a very similar situation where the Jewish people were threatened physically, and the Jewish people were able to overcome it? The response of Mordechai is that Mordechai gathered 22,000 Jewish people. Mordechai strengthened the Jewish people and rededicated the Jewish people to their religion. That is the Jewish response to the attacks of our enemies against the Jewish people. It's not enough that it's also important, but it's not enough that we give money to help the people. Of course, we have to do that. And it's not enough to support them and to make sure that they know that Jewish people, wherever they are, we're all united. That's all important. But what is the outcome of that has to be that we apply ourselves to practical Judaism. Just like in the times of the Megillah, they rededicated themselves to Judaism, and that gave them the ultimate victory. The same thing has to be in our days and our times. We have to remember that the Megillah, as it says in the Mishnah, that somebody who reads the Megillah out of order does not fulfill their obligation. And the Baal Shem Tov said that this applies not just in a practical sense of how to make sure to read the Megillah in the proper order, but if somebody reads the Megillah as if it's in the past, that says the Megillah is a book, it's a nice story that happened a long time ago, you have not fulfilled your obligation of Purim. Purim is not about a story that happened long ago. It's a story of us today. And today, unfortunately, we're living in a similar situation of the Jewish people being physically attacked. We know that it's besides all the good things that we're doing with charity and physical defense of the Jewish people, we have to rededicate ourselves to Judaism, repent, and focus on doing positive mitzvahs in Torah, Jewish education, dedication to the Jewish holidays, and of course, being proud to be Jewish. Wishing everybody a good Shabbos, and God willing, we will see you next week.